The stars had always called to humanity, and after centuries of dreaming, they finally answered that call. 47 years ago, the first human ship crossed into Council space, and everything changed for the young species from Earth. They were no longer alone in the universe, and the galaxy welcomed them with open arms and promises of friendship. The Galactic Council was ancient beyond human understanding, 12 species working together for thousands of years, building an empire of trade and cooperation that stretched across 1,000,000 worlds. They had seen young species rise before, and they believed they knew exactly how to handle these newcomers from the deadly world called Earth. Admiral Elena Vasquez remembered the day she first stood before the council chambers on the station called Eternal Accord. The room was made of living crystal that sang with each footstep, and representatives from a dozen alien species watched her with curious eyes. She had felt so small that day, so aware that humanity was the youngest civilization in a room full of ancient powers. The Volanti were the oldest of them all, tall beings with silver skin and 4 arms. They moved with the grace of creatures who had ruled the stars when humans were still living in caves. Their leader, High Sovereign Malthus, had smiled at her with too many teeth and spoken words of welcome that seemed sincere. The Crest Collective sat in their floating pods, their insect-like bodies clicking and buzzing as they calculated everything they saw. They were logical beings who reduced all things to numbers and probability, and they had looked at humanity with the cold interest of scientists studying a new specimen. There were others, too, the gentle Morvathi with their blue fur and kind eyes, the crystalline Shardborn who communicated through light, the massive Gorath who resembled walking mountains. All of them had welcomed humanity into their community, and Elena had believed every word they said. That was her first mistake. For 47 years, humanity worked hard to prove themselves worthy of the Council. They shared their technology and learned from their new allies. They followed every rule and respected every tradition. They sent their brightest minds to study at alien universities and opened their borders to trade and cultural exchange. And then came the proposal that would change everything. The Helix Expanse was a region of space rich with rare minerals that humanity desperately needed. Their population was growing fast, and their colonies needed resources to survive. Admiral Vasquez had spent months preparing her presentation, showing the Council how humanity could develop the region while respecting existing claims. High Sovereign Malthus had listened carefully, his 4 hands pressed together in what the translators called a gesture of deep consideration. "The Helix Expanse is unclaimed," he had said, his voice smooth as silk, "and the Council sees no reason why humanity should not settle there. We will provide star charts and assistance. Consider this a gift to our youngest members." Elena had felt tears in her eyes as she thanked them. Finally, humanity was being accepted as true partners in the galactic community. Finally, they were being given a chance to grow and thrive among the stars. 3 colony ships launched within the year. The UES Hope carried 400,000 settlers to the first world. The UES Promise brought 300,000 to the second. And the UES Future took 500,000 to the third. Families packed their belongings and said goodbye to Earth, excited to build new lives on new worlds. Elena personally spoke to many of them before they left. She shook hands with engineers and teachers and doctors. She held babies born on the ships and blessed by the dreams of their parents. She made promises that these colonies would be safe, that humanity had finally found its place in the galaxy. Those promises turned to ash in her mouth. 6 months after the colonies were established, the communications went dark. At first, the military assumed it was a technical problem. The Helix Expanse was far from relay stations, and signals sometimes got lost in the void between stars. But then, a single transmission broke through the silence. Elena was in her office when the message arrived. She remembered every detail of that moment. The cup of coffee growing cold on her desk. The picture of her daughter smiling from the shelf. The way the light from the window made patterns on the floor. And then the screen flickered to life, and she heard screaming. A child was crying for her mother. In the background, Elena could see fire and smoke, and shadows moving with weapons raised. The sound of explosions shook the camera, and somewhere far away, adult voices were begging for mercy in words that made no difference. The transmission lasted 11 seconds before cutting to static. Elena sent every ship she had to the Helix Expanse. They pushed their engines beyond safe limits, desperate to reach the colonies in time to help. Soldiers prepared for battle against unknown enemies. Medics readied supplies for survivors they prayed they would find. What they found instead broke something inside all of them. The first colony was gone, not destroyed in the way of natural disasters or accidents, but systematically burned. Buildings had been melted to slag by weapons fire from orbit. The ground was black and cracked from the heat, and nothing remained of the 400,000 people who had lived there. The second colony was the same, ash and silence, and the twisted remains of what had once been homes and schools and hospitals. Scanners found no survivors, no bodies, nothing but the evidence of complete and total destruction. The third colony held the only clue to what had happened. A young officer named James Chen found a piece of debris floating in orbit. It was hull plating from a ship, and the markings on it were unmistakable. Valanthi military designation. Council ships had done this. Their allies, their friends, the beings who had welcomed humanity with open arms and guided them to these worlds. They had waited until the colonies were established, until families had planted gardens and children had started schools, and then they had burned everything to nothing. Admiral Vasquez received the report in silence. Her hands did not shake, and her voice did not break. But something in her eyes died that day, and was replaced by something cold and patient and terrible. 3 days later, the Galactic Council released an official statement. The human colonies in the Helix Expanse violated sacred Valanthi territorial claims that predate Council records. While the loss of life is regrettable, the Council supports the Valanthi sovereignty's right to defend their ancestral holdings. We hope humanity will learn from this misunderstanding and continue to be valued members of our community. Regrettable. They had murdered 1.2 million people. 400,000 of them were children. Babies who had been blessed with dreams. Families who had trusted the galaxy to be kind. Settlers who wanted nothing more than to build homes and live in peace. And the Council called it regrettable. Admiral Vasquez stood before the United Earth government that night. Generals and presidents and leaders from every nation watched her face on screens around the world. She did not cry, and she did not scream, and she did not make threats that everyone expected. Instead, she spoke 3 sentences that would echo through history. They believe this is over. They believe we will mourn and move on and accept what they have done. They are wrong. The galaxy waited for humanity to respond, and the galaxy waited in vain. Every species in Council space had seen young civilizations react to tragedy before. Some collapsed into civil war, tearing themselves apart in grief and rage. Others launched desperate attacks against their enemies, burning bright and fast before being crushed by superior forces. A few simply surrendered, accepting their place at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy. Humanity did none of these things. Within 1 week of the Helix massacre, as humans had begun to call it, every human ship returned to Earth space. Every embassy closed its doors. Every communication channel went dark. The borders of human territory sealed shut, like a wound closing, and nothing came out. The Council watched with mild interest at first. They assumed the humans were grieving, processing their loss, learning the harsh lesson that the galaxy had taught so many species before. High Sovereign Malthus sent a message offering condolences and suggesting that humanity could earn back the Council's trust through proper behavior in the future. The message received no response. Weeks passed, then months. Council merchants who had grown rich trading with humans found their contracts worthless. Scientists who had been collaborating on research projects received silence where there had once been eager communication. Diplomats sent inquiry after inquiry into the void and heard nothing back. Ambassador Tyrell of the Kreth Collective was the first to feel true concern. His species had evolved to predict patterns, to see the mathematics hidden in behavior. And humanity's actions did not match any pattern his people had ever recorded. He stood before his analysis chamber, watching probability matrices shift and change on screens that covered every wall. His assistants clicked nervously behind him, their antennae twitching with unease. "They should have attacked by now," one assistant said, her voice a series of precise chirps, translated by machines. "Our models show an 87% chance of retaliatory strikes within the first 30 days. We are now beyond 100 days with no military action." Tyrell's compound eyes narrowed as he studied the data. "What do the models say about extended silence?" The assistant hesitated before answering. "The models have no comparable data. No species in recorded history has responded to an attack of this magnitude with complete withdrawal. It does not compute." "Then perhaps," Tyrell said slowly, "we are dealing with something our models cannot predict." He was more right than he knew. Within the sealed borders of human space, something unprecedented was happening. Grief had transformed into purpose, and purpose had become action on a scale the galaxy had never witnessed. Every shipyard in human territory began running triple shifts. Factories that had produced civilian goods converted to military production overnight. Miners worked until exhaustion pulled them from their posts, only to be replaced by fresh workers equally determined to contribute. Admiral Vasquez coordinated it all from a command center buried deep beneath the surface of Luna. She slept 4 hours a night and spent every waking moment planning, organizing, preparing for what was to come. Her hair turned gray in those months, and lines carved themselves deep into her face. But her eyes burned with a fire that never dimmed. Scientists received new orders from the United Earth government. Every research project not related to defense was suspended indefinitely. Brilliant minds who had spent their lives studying medicine and agriculture and art found themselves working on weapons and shields and engines capable of speeds that should have been impossible. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was one of these scientists. She had spent 20 years researching theoretical physics, exploring the fundamental forces that held the universe together. Her work was abstract, beautiful, the kind of pure science that seemed to have no practical application. Now she had a very practical application indeed. She worked in a bunker beneath the Tanaka Research Facility, surrounded by equipment that pushed the boundaries of human technology. Her team consisted of the brightest minds humanity had produced, and together they chased an idea that most physicists had dismissed as fantasy. "The fundamental forces can be manipulated," she explained to Admiral Vasquez during one of her rare briefings. "Gravity, electromagnetism, the nuclear forces, they are not constants, but variables that can be adjusted under the right conditions." Vasquez leaned forward. "Adjusted how?" Dr. Tanaka pulled up holographic displays showing mathematical formulas that hurt to look at. Every star is a balance of forces, gravity pulling inward, fusion pushing outward. If we disrupt that balance precisely enough, we can cause a stellar collapse almost instantaneously. The room went very quiet. "You are talking about killing stars," Vasquez said. "Yes," Dr. Tanaka replied without hesitation. "I am talking about giving humanity the power to turn off suns." They called it the whisper engine because of the sound it made when activated, a soft hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, as if reality itself was holding its breath. The device was massive, requiring a ship larger than anything humanity had ever built just to carry it. Construction began immediately. Meanwhile, the Council grew increasingly nervous. Their scouts probed the edges of human space, trying to gather intelligence about what was happening behind those sealed borders. Most scouts simply vanished without a trace. The few that returned brought only sensor ghosts and strange readings that made no sense. High Sovereign Malthus dismissed the concerns of his advisors. "They are a young species nursing their wounds," he declared at a council meeting. "When they emerge, they will be humbled and ready to accept their proper place. This silence is not strength, but cowardice." Ambassador Tyrell said nothing, but his calculations told a different story. 3 years after the Helix massacre, humanity finally broke their silence. A single ship emerged from human space. It was small, barely larger than a shuttle, and it carried no weapons that Council sensors could detect. It flew directly to the heart of Council territory, passing defense fleets that were too surprised to react, and took position directly above the Volanthi homeworld. Every screen in Council space activated at once. On space stations and colony worlds, in government buildings and private homes, the same image appeared. Admiral Elena Vasquez, her face hard as stone, and her eyes cold as the void between stars. 3 years ago, she began, her voice carrying across 1,000,000 worlds, "You murdered 1.2 million of our people." The Volanthi defense fleet scrambled, weapons locking onto the tiny ship, but Vasquez continued speaking as if she had all the time in the universe. "You burned our colonies and killed our children, and you called it regrettable. You expected us to accept your judgment and learn our place. You believed that violence would teach us submission." High Sovereign Malthus watched from his palace, his 4 hands gripping his throne with sudden uncertainty. "We have learned a different lesson," Vasquez said. "We have learned that the galaxy respects only strength. We have learned that treaties are worthless without the power to enforce them. We have learned that mercy is a luxury we can no longer afford." The transmission shifted to show images that made Council military commanders gasp in disbelief. Ships beyond anything they had imagined. Weapons that pulsed with energy their sensors could not identify. A fleet so vast it blackened the stars behind it. And at the center of that fleet, a vessel so large it bent light around its hull. The UES Reckoning, carrying the Whisper engine and the Death of Stars. "You have 30 days, Vasquez announced. "Evacuate your capitals, your stations, your sacred worlds. Take your families and your histories and your hopes for survival." She leaned forward, and every being watching felt as if she was looking directly at them. "Run." The transmission ended, the ship vanished into hyperspace, and across the galaxy, panic began to spread like fire through dry grass. The message played on repeat across every world in Council space, and with each viewing, the fear grew deeper. Admiral Vasquez had given them 30 days, and the first day was consumed entirely by chaos. Governments held emergency sessions that stretched through the night. Military commanders demanded action, while civilians flooded communication networks with desperate questions. Children asked their parents why everyone looked so afraid, and parents had no answers to give. High Sovereign Malthus addressed the Volanthi people from his crystal palace, his forearms spread wide in a gesture meant to convey confidence. His voice boomed through speakers on every continent of their ancient homeworld. "We have faced threats before," he declared. "For 10,000 years, the Volanthi have ruled these stars. Empires have risen and fallen, and we remain. These humans are children throwing tantrums. Nothing more. Our fleets will crush them, and the galaxy will remember why we are the masters of this domain." His people cheered, but the cheers sounded hollow to those who listened carefully. In the chambers of the Creth Collective, Ambassador Tyrell stood before the Grand Algorithm, the massive computer network that guided all major decisions for his species. Probability matrices covered the walls in shifting patterns of light, and every pattern told the same story. "Show me the scenarios," Tyrell commanded, his voice steady despite the fear crawling through his thorax. The algorithm responded with cold precision. In scenario after scenario, the collective calculated outcomes of conflict with humanity. Victory percentages appeared and disappeared, each one smaller than the last. Defensive formations were simulated and found wanting. Alliance strategies crumbled under projected human responses. "What is our best chance of survival through military resistance?" Tyrell asked. The algorithm displayed a number, 7%. "And if we evacuate to the Galactic Rim?" The number changed, 63%. Tyrell turned to face the assembled leaders of his species. We leave now, and we leave everything behind. Survival is the only calculation that matters." Within hours, the greatest migration in Kreth history began. Trillions of insect-like beings abandoned worlds they had inhabited for millennia. Ships of every size launched in endless streams, carrying families and records and whatever could be saved. They did not look back, because looking back meant seeing everything they were losing. The Morvathi Federation reacted differently. They had been humanity's closest friends among the Council species, or so they had believed. Their blue-furred diplomats had shared meals with human ambassadors and spoken of partnership and mutual respect. Now they gathered in their Senate chamber, shame weighing heavy on their shoulders. "We knew," Senator Velik admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "When the Valanthi proposed the trap, we knew what they intended. We should have warned the humans. We should have stood against the massacre." "We were afraid," another senator replied. "The Valanthi have dominated the council for generations. Opposing them meant risking everything we had built." "And now we have lost everything anyway," Velik said. "Our silence makes us complicit. Human children died because we lacked the courage to speak." The Morvathi sent an envoy to human space, hoping that their history of friendship might count for something. The diplomat who volunteered was old and tired, a being who had spent his life believing in peace and cooperation between species. He was allowed to pass through human borders, escorted by warships that dwarfed anything he had ever seen. Their hulls were dark and angular, designed for war in ways that made his heart ache. These were not the ships of the hopeful species he had known before the massacre. Admiral Vasquez received him on the bridge of the UES Vengeance, surrounded by officers whose eyes held no warmth. "We oppose the massacre," the envoy said, his voice trembling. "Many of us argued against it in council chambers. We wanted to warn you, but we were overruled. Please, you must understand our position." Admiral Vasquez studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You opposed it, and then what happened?" "The Valanthi threatened economic sanctions. They have controlled trade routes for centuries. We could not afford to anger them," Vasquez said. "You calculated the cost," Vasquez said. "You weighed the lives of our children against your trade agreements, and you decided that our children were worth less. You watched them burn and did nothing because the price of courage was too high." The envoy had no response. "We do not want your extinction," Vasquez continued. "We are not monsters despite what your council believes. But we will have justice. The beings who ordered the massacre will face trial. The species that participated will remember the cost of betrayal." "And if we refuse?" Vasquez's expression did not change. "You have 26 days to make that decision. I suggest you use them wisely." The envoy returned to Morvathi space with nothing but warnings. His government began quiet evacuations of their most vulnerable populations, preparing for the worst, while hoping for mercy they knew they did not deserve. Meanwhile, the Valanthi prepared for war. High Sovereign Malthius commanded his admirals to gather the greatest fleet in their history. 3,000 warships assembled above their homeworld, a display of military power that had crushed rebellions and deterred enemies for 10,000 years. "Let them come," Malthus proclaimed to his generals. "We have faced Deathworlders before. We have broken species far more dangerous than these humans. They are young and foolish and blinded by grief. We will teach them the same lesson we taught the Corvani, the Asheth, the Vilmar." His generals nodded and voiced their agreement. But some of them remembered the images from the human transmission. Those ships had been enormous, and those weapons had glowed with energy signatures that no one could identify. The humans had not looked like a species blinded by grief. They had looked like a species that had found a terrible clarity. Day 10 of the countdown arrived, and the galaxy held its breath. Human fleets began appearing at the borders of Council space, not attacking, not advancing, simply waiting in perfect formation. They made no demands and answered no hails. They were patient and silent, and absolutely certain of what was coming. The shard-born crystalline beings, who had always prided themselves on their neutrality, quietly began relocating their consciousness matrices to distant moons. The Gorath mountain giants retreated to their fortress worlds and sealed their gates. Smaller species fled in whatever ships they could find, scattering like leaves before a storm. Only the Volanthi stood firm, their pride refusing to bend even as their allies abandoned them. High Sovereign Malthus sent one final message to the human fleet. "We do not fear you," he declared. "We have stood for 10,000 years, and we will stand for 10,000 more. Bring your ships and your weapons. We will show you the true meaning of power." Admiral Vasquez received the message and read it once before deleting it. "He still does not understand," she said to her officers. "He thinks this is about power. He thinks this is about ships and weapons and military strength." She looked out at the stars, at the darkness between them where her fleet waited. "This is about 400,000 children who will never grow up. This is about families who trusted the galaxy and were betrayed. This is about making sure that no species ever believes they can murder humans and face no consequences." She turned to face her bridge crew. "This is about teaching the universe a lesson it will never forget." Day 30 approached, and the Volanthi sun continued to shine, unaware that its days were numbered. Day 29 dawned across the Volanthi homeworld, and the streets that had once bustled with confidence now echoed with fear. The proud species had not evacuated. Their High Sovereign had forbidden it, declaring that any citizen who fled would be branded a traitor and stripped of their heritage. But behind closed doors, families whispered about escape routes and distant colonies where Malthus's authority could not reach them. Children looked up at their parents with eyes full of questions that no one could answer. Why were the humans so angry? Why had the council burned their worlds? Why did the adults keep watching the sky as if waiting for something terrible to fall from it? The Volanthi High Fleet hung in orbit like a wall of silver steel. 3,000 warships, each one carrying enough firepower to devastate a continent. Their admirals broadcast constant reassurances, promising that no human ship would ever reach the surface of their sacred world. But the admirals did not sleep well, and their voices carried less conviction with each passing hour. Supreme Admiral Vorthos stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching sensor displays that showed the human fleet waiting at the edge of their territory. They had not moved in days, had not responded to any communication, had simply waited with a patience that unnerved him more than any threat. "How many ships do they have?" he asked his tactical officer. The officer hesitated before answering. "Our sensors cannot get accurate readings, Supreme Admiral. Their hulls seem to absorb our scanning frequencies. Best estimates suggest between 800 and 1,200 vessels." "We outnumber them nearly 3-1, Vorthos said, but the words did not comfort him. "Yes, Supreme Admiral. However, their smallest ship is twice the size of our largest battlecruiser. Their weapon signatures do not match any technology in our databases. And the vessel at the center of their formation is generating energy readings that our computers cannot process. Vorthos stared at the display, showing that central vessel, the one the humans called the UES Reckoning. It was massive beyond comprehension, a dark shape that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Something about it made his scales itch with primal fear. "What do we know about their weapons?" he asked. "Nothing certain, Supreme Admiral. Intelligence reports suggest they have developed some form of spatial manipulation technology, but the details are classified beyond even our access." Vorthos closed his eyes and remembered the wars of his youth, the campaigns that had crushed rebellious species and expanded Volanthi territory across entire sectors. He had been confident then, certain of his people's superiority, proud to serve an empire that had stood for 10,000 years. Now he felt like a child, standing before a storm he could not comprehend. In his palace below, High Sovereign Malthius refused all counsel of caution. His advisors begged him to negotiate, to offer concessions, to do anything that might avoid the coming conflict. He dismissed them all with contempt. "We are Volanthi," he declared to his empty throne room. "We do not bow to children. We do not surrender to grief-maddened primitives. If they want war, we will give them a war that echoes through eternity." But even his voice sounded hollow in the vast chamber, and his 4 hands trembled slightly as he gripped his throne. Across the galaxy, the final day began with silent farewells. Ambassador Tyrell of the Kreth Collective had led his people to safety in the Galactic Rim, far from the coming storm. They had built temporary settlements on barren moons, crowded and uncomfortable, but alive. He watched the stars from an observation deck, knowing that somewhere beyond his sight, history was about to change. "Do you think they will really do it?" his assistant asked, her antennae drooping with exhaustion. "The humans?" Tyrell considered the question carefully. "They have demonstrated patience beyond anything our models predicted. They have shown strategic thinking that rivals our best algorithms. And they have made a promise in front of the entire galaxy." He turned to face her. "Yes, I believe they will do exactly what they said. The only question is how far they will go." The Morvathi had split into factions. Some had fled with the Kreth, seeking safety and distance. Others had remained, hoping that their past friendship with humanity might earn them mercy. Senator Velik stayed on her homeworld, watching the countdown approach its end. "We should have been braver," she said to the empty Senate chamber. "We should have stood for what was right, even if it cost us everything. Now we will learn what that everything might have been." On Earth, the families of the Helix colonists gathered in memorial gardens that had been built to honor those who died. They held pictures of children who would never grow up, partners who would never come home, parents who had gone to the stars full of hope and returned as ash. Admiral Vasquez walked among them on that final day, speaking with those who wanted to talk, sitting in silence with those who had no words left. She had ordered the memorial built herself, had approved every name carved into the walls, had wept alone in her quarters when no one could see. A young woman approached her, carrying a photograph of a little girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. "She was my daughter," the woman said. "Maya. She was 7 years old. She loved butterflies and hated vegetables, and dreamed of being an explorer." Vasquez took the photograph gently, studying the face of a child she had never met but would never forget. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. The woman's eyes were red from years of crying, but her voice was steady. "I want them to remember. I want every species in this galaxy to know that my daughter mattered. I want them to understand that there are consequences for what they did." "They will," Vasquez promised. "I swear to you, they will." She returned to her command ship as the final hours ticked away. Her officers were ready, her fleet was positioned, and the whisper engine hummed softly in the heart of the reckoning, like a sleeping god waiting to wake. Dr. Yuki Tanaka joined her on the bridge, the scientist who had made all of this possible. She looked older than her years, worn down by the weight of what she had created. "Having second thoughts?" Vasquez asked. Tanaka shook her head. "I keep thinking about the children, about what their last moments must have been like, about the fear they felt as fire fell from the sky. And then I think about the Valanthi, sitting in their palaces, calling it regrettable." She looked at the screens showing the Valanthi star, bright and warm, and completely unaware of what was coming. "They need to understand," Tanaka said. "They need to feel what we felt, not extinction, but the knowledge that extinction was possible. The terror of watching everything they love balanced on the edge of oblivion." Vasquez nodded slowly. "And if they still refuse to surrender the war criminals? Then we show them that our mercy has limits." The countdown reached 0. Across human space, clocks chimed, and alarms sounded, and a civilization held its breath. Admiral Vasquez opened a channel to her fleet. "All ships, this is the Admiral. 3 years ago, they burned our children and expected us to forget. Today, we remind the galaxy that humanity does not forget, does not forgive, and does not accept injustice." She straightened in her command chair, her eyes fixed on the stars. "Fleet advance. It is time to collect what we are owed." 1,000 engines roared to life, and humanity went to war. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, and for one frozen moment, the galaxy witnessed the true face of awakened humanity. Supreme Admiral Vorthis watched his sensors fill with contacts, each one larger and more powerful than anything his fleet possessed. The humans moved with geometric precision, ships flowing into position like parts of a single enormous machine. There was no hesitation, no disorder, no sign of the chaos that should have accompanied such a massive deployment. And at the center of that formation, the UES Reckoning hung like a dark moon, its hull drinking in light and returning nothing. Sensors screamed warnings about energy readings beyond their capacity to measure. The ship was not just large, it was wrong somehow, as if reality itself bent slightly in its presence. "All batteries open fire," Vorthis commanded, refusing to let his fear show. "Destroy that vessel before they can use whatever weapon it carries." 3,000 Valanthi warships fired as one. Energy beams lanced across the void. Missiles streaked toward their targets. Weapons that had shattered civilizations for millennia converged on the human fleet in a storm of destruction that should have ended the battle before it began. Every shot stopped dead 3 kilometers from the human hulls. The Valanthi watched in disbelief as their most powerful weapons hung motionless in space, suspended by fields of distorted spacetime that their science could not explain. Beams of pure energy twisted into spirals and dissipated harmlessly. Missiles froze mid-flight, as if time itself had ceased to function. Then the human ships began to move forward, and the suspended weapons simply fell away behind them, like raindrops sliding off glass. "What is this?" Vorthas whispered, his voice breaking. On the bridge of the UES Vengeance, Admiral Vasquez watched the Valanthi assault fail with grim satisfaction. The defensive shields her scientists had developed were performing exactly as designed, using the same fundamental force manipulation that powered the Whisper engine, to create barriers that conventional weapons could not penetrate. "Open a channel," she ordered. Her face appeared on every screen in the Valanthi fleet and on every display across their homeworld. Billions of beings watched as the human admiral addressed them with a voice like cold iron. "Surrender your government officials responsible for the Helix massacre. Those who ordered the attack, those who planned it, those who knew and did nothing, deliver them to us for trial. This is your final offer. High Sovereign Malthius watched from his palace, his 4 hands clenching into fists. He had ruled for 300 years, had crushed rebellions and conquered worlds, had never in his long life bent his knee to anyone. "Never," he broadcast in response. "We are Valanthi. We will never surrender our leaders to alien justice. Fire again. Fire everything." The second volley was even more intense than the first. Every ship in the Valanthi fleet emptied its weapons banks, throwing everything they had at the advancing humans. The void between the fleets became a wall of fire and energy and desperate hope. It made no difference. The shields held, and the human advance continued. Admiral Vasquez closed the communication channel and turned to face Dr. Tanaka, who stood at a control station near the back of the bridge. Their eyes met, and 1,000 unspoken words passed between them in that moment. "Whisper," Vasquez said softly. Dr. Tanaka's hands moved across her console, and aboard the UES Reckoning, the greatest weapon humanity had ever created came to life. The sound was exactly as Tanaka had described, a soft hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Space rippled around the Reckoning, waves of distortion spreading outward like the rings from a stone dropped in still water. And then, those waves touched the Valanthi sun. The star flickered. For one heartbeat, the light that had warmed their world for billions of years simply stopped. Sensors across both fleets went mad with readings that made no sense, and beings on the Valanthi homeworld looked up at a sky that had suddenly gone wrong. The Valanthi sun did not explode. That would have been merciful. Instead, it collapsed. The fundamental forces that kept it burning were disrupted in ways that violated every law of physics the Council had ever discovered. Fusion stopped. Gravity won. And in the span of 30 seconds, a star that had burned for 5 billion years became a cold, dead sphere of compressed matter. Light began to fade across the Valanthi homeworld. Supreme Admiral Vorthis watched in horror as his sensors showed the impossible. The temperature on the planet below was already dropping, and it would continue to drop until everything on that world was frozen solid. His entire species faced extinction, not in fire, but in ice. "You have hours," Admiral Vasquez broadcast to the shocked Valanthi. "Perhaps days if you work quickly. Your sun is dead, but your people do not have to follow. Evacuate your world. We will allow your ships to pass. But know that this can happen to any star, at any time, to any species that believes they can murder humanity without consequence." The Valanthi fleet broke. Ships that had stood in formation for the battle now scattered toward the planet, desperate to save as many of their people as possible. Supreme Admiral Vorthis screamed orders that no one followed. His authority shattered along with his confidence. On the homeworld below, High Sovereign Malthius watched the sky grow dark and felt something he had never experienced in 300 years of rule. Fear. True, primal, absolute fear. His own people came for him within the hour. They broke down the doors of his palace, dragged him from his throne, and handed him to the humans, along with every official who had participated in the Helix massacre. 12 beings in total, delivered in chains to face the justice they had denied to others. Admiral Vasquez received them on the bridge of her ship, studying faces that had ordered the deaths of children and felt no remorse. "You will stand trial," she told them. "You will face the families of those you murdered. You will answer for what you have done. And when judgment is passed, the galaxy will know that humanity does not forget." Malthius tried to speak, to threaten, to bluster as he had always done, but no words came. He had ruled through fear for 3 centuries, and now he understood what fear truly meant. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council dissolved. The Valanthi were broken, their homeworld evacuated, their empire in ruins. The Kreth Collective negotiated peace from their exile in the Galactic Rim. The Morvathi begged forgiveness. They knew they did not deserve. Ambassador Tyrell requested a final meeting with Admiral Vasquez as the new galactic order took shape. They met on a station above Earth, surrounded by the stars that humanity had claimed as their domain. "I have one question," Tyrell said. "You had the power to destroy us all. Your weapon could have killed every star in Council space, ended every species that had wronged you. Why show mercy?" Vasquez looked out the window at Earth, at the blue marble that had birthed her species and sent them into the void with hope in their hearts. "Because we are not you," she said quietly. "We wanted you to understand what you did. We wanted you to feel the terror of watching everything you love threatened with destruction. We wanted you to live with the knowledge of what you almost lost." She turned to face Tyrell, her eyes hard but not cruel. "Destruction is easy. Any species can learn to destroy. Making someone truly understand the weight of their actions, the consequences of their cruelty, that is far more difficult. The Volanthi will rebuild, and every time they look at their new sun, they will remember that humans gave them mercy they did not give us." Tyrell was silent for a long moment. "And if another species harms humanity again?" Vasquez smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "We gave the galaxy one word: run. The next species that harms our children will not receive a word. They will not receive a warning. They will simply learn why humanity was called Death Worlders." She turned back to the window. "We hoped for peace. We reached for friendship. We trusted, and we were betrayed. Now the galaxy knows the truth about humanity. We are kind to those who earn it. We are patient with those who need it. And we are absolutely merciless to those who harm the ones we love." The stars stretched out before her, endless and beautiful, and finally, truly safe for the children of Earth. "Let them remember that," Admiral Elena Vasquez said. "Let them remember that forever."